From a young age, I bore a face strikingly similar to the eldest miss of the Sioux clan, yet we swapped identities just before her wedding, for no other reason than she was discovered to be with child while preparing for marriage. 3 months later, Fiona Sioux, pale-faced and weeping, begged to reverse the identity exchange. I laughed brightly. Where does this wench come from, so eager to court death? 1. I have a face so like the young ladies that even the matron doubted she might have borne twins. But this was no blessing. The matron found me in the servants' quarters during the depths of winter. My hands, chapped from endless washing in cold water, were riddled with chilblains. My face gaunt, hair brittle and sallow, lips cracked and bleeding, with dried blood crusted around my mouth. The matron paused in surprise, then gently took my hand and asked if I wished to become the young lady's personal handmaiden. Naturally, I was willing. A personal handmaiden is a first-rank servant, infinitely better than the lowest drudgery. Yet I dared not show my eagerness, merely bowing my head slightly and glancing cautiously at the matron. The matron gave a gentle smile and led me out of the servants' quarters. From then on, I became the eldest Miss Fiona Sioux's most shamefully kept personal handmaiden. But at the time, I didn't know that my mother was the matron's own sister, and that I too was a young lady of the Sioux clan. Fiona Sioux disliked me from the very first moment she saw me, demanding that I cover my face with a veil every day and never reveal my appearance to anyone, simply because she couldn't bear to see her own face on a lowly servant. That year, I was 11, and the young miss was only 10. Second, I was astonished by the eldest miss's extravagant lifestyle. Having grown up in hardship, I never knew clothes could be so soft, hair could smell so fragrant, or pastries could taste so sweet. A personal handmaiden was expected to style hair and match outfits. But how could a coarse servant like me know such things? So I was scolded and berated by her daily, and if my work still fell short, I faced beatings with a rod to avoid her abuse. I desperately learned everything I could from my surroundings, gradually becoming little more than her shadow. At 11, when she failed to complete the tutor's assignments, I took 30 strikes of the ruler for her. At 12, after she pushed the fourth miss into the lotus pond, I endured 30 heavy strokes and knelt in the ancestral hall for 7 days in her stead. At 13, she admired the crown prince, so I embroidered a handkerchief for her that won his praise. In return, she pierced all 10 of my fingers with needles until they bled. At 14, I composed a poem for her at the spring gala that caught the crown prince's eye. She became the most sought after maiden in the capital, while she lashed me with a soft whip until my skin was torn. Everyone knew Fiona Sioux had a quiet, veiled handmaiden, but no one knew I shared her face. Whenever she erred, I would wear her clothes and take her punishment. Yet, whenever my abilities outshone hers, her jealousy always made me suffer dearly. After all, aside from her and the matron, almost no one had ever seen my true appearance. And I am her handmaiden, her servant, her shadow, and even her object. She has the power to dispose of me as she pleases, and I can only accept it with gratitude. At 15, she was betrothed by the emperor to a young General Finian, with the wedding set for 2 years later. Furious, she smashed things in her room. A shard flew and left a bloody gash on one side of my face. I hurriedly removed my veil, but she cursed me as a wench and ordered me to kneel outside in the snow. It was truly cold. I had never experienced a winter so bitter since I was 11. Still unsatisfied, Fiona Sioux made me repeat over and over, I am forever Fiona Sioux's lowliest wench. I am forever Fiona Sioux's lowliest wench. My voice echoed again and again in the empty courtyard, the cold wind biting sharply at the wound on my face. In my most desperate moment, a young man perched on the eaves tilted his head and looked at me. Little lady, what are you doing? Startled, I covered my mouth, my eyes wide with fear as I stared at him. He probably knew his behavior was truly improper, so he fished out a honey candy from his robe and tossed it to me. Fiona Sioux in the room wasn't having it, shouting through the door, "Where's your voice? If I don't hear it again, you'll kneel here for 3 days." I choked back a sob, lowered my head, and continued, I will always be Fiona Sue's lowliest wench. I am forever Fiona Sue's lowliest wench. The young man on the wall went from confusion to fury, then leaped down with his sword in hand. I was terrified by his actions, wondering what kind of thief would dare to be so brazen. Fortunately, he stopped just short of the door, turned around, placed a small bag of honey candy before me, and then scaled the wall to leave the Sioux estate. I stared blankly at the honey candy on the ground, my vision gradually blurring. 3. An imperial decree is an imperial decree. It's not so easily changed. Even if Fiona Sue turned the Sioux clan upside down, there was no way to alter this matter. But Fiona Sue seemed to have gone mad, firmly believing there must be a way for her to marry the crown prince and become the revered crown princess. So she set her sights on the spring hunt, a season when even cats would meow twice. The hunting grounds were filled with nobles and aristocrats, and many young ladies had gathered there as well. To be honest, it was many times livelier than the spring gala. Fiona Sue tried to mount a horse but failed. She raised about a shoot but missed. She attempted polo but couldn't hit the ball either. All the noble ladies laughed at her, even teasing that General Finian, stationed at the frontier, should teach her properly. Even the crown prince watched her from afar, holding a wine cup. Humiliated and furious, she returned to her tent, and I followed her back. Fiona Sue's request was simple. She wanted me to wear her clothes and thoroughly humiliate those ladies who had mocked her. Naturally, I agreed. In fact, I even felt a hint of satisfaction every time I removed my veil and changed into Fiona Sue's clothes. I felt truly free and joyful. I had studied the 6 arts of the gentleman in her stead, so archery and horsemanship were no challenge for me. I effortlessly became the center of attention, while Fiona Sue, disguised as a maid, pinched the soft flesh at my waist in a frenzy. The crown prince also changed into riding attire and approached with a slight smile, inviting me to hunt deep within the grounds. Fiona Sue tried to follow, but the crown prince stopped her, smiling yet with an ambiguous look in his eyes. The Sioux clan's maids grow ever more presumptuous. You ought to discipline them properly. And so, Fiona Sue watched as I followed the crown prince deep into the hunting grounds. 4. I couldn't tell whether the crown prince was cunningly profound or simply innocent. I had thought he took the eldest miss of the Sioux clan aside with ulterior motives, but it turned out he simply admired my skill in archery and horsemanship. We rode through the grounds for a full circuit, our hands nearly overflowing with the game we had taken. Just as he was laughing heartily, a cold arrow flew over and pierced straight into the crown prince's chest. The next 2 arrows were aimed at me, as if determined to leave no survivors. Frowning, I moved closer to the crown prince. Even though I dodged to avoid vital spots, arrows still struck my left leg and right shoulder. The assassin across shot the arrows and fled immediately. I supported the crown prince, taking cover in a dirt pit for a long while. Only when I saw no one around did I help him onto a horse and rush toward the camp. The crown prince coughed up 2 mouthfuls of blood, then managed a faint smile and said, "Lady of the Sioux clan, do not worry. I was born different from others. My heart is on the right side, and I wear golden silk armor inside. It won't be a serious problem." Excruciating pain shot through my calf and shoulder, and my vision began to blur. I bit the tip of my tongue to stay conscious and replied, "Your Highness's health is paramount. It's best to conserve your strength for now. Since I'm wearing Fiona Sue's clothes, I must act as she would and fulfill the duties expected of her." The crown prince leaned close behind me and suddenly remarked, "The Sioux clan can't even take proper care of a young lady, allowing such beauty to be scarred." My heart jolted, but I remained silent, feeling increasingly dizzy. I could only urge my horse to gallop faster toward the camp. As the camp's colorful banners came into view, my vision finally darkened and I lost consciousness. 5. When I awoke again, I was in a woodshed with rain dripping through the roof. My arms and legs were abnormally swollen and painful. Not only that, but my entire body burned with fever. I knew this was the consequence of untreated wounds. When I tried to move, I discovered I was tightly bound from head to toe, unable to shift an inch. Hearing my stirrings, Someone outside immediately opened the door and hurried in. It was Matron Mo, a mute peasant woman who was also the matron's trusted confidant. Seeing I was awake, she lifted the already cooled medicine from the table and forced it down my throat. I choked, my chest heaving, while the corners of her eyes reddened slightly. After setting down the bowl, she began gesturing to me with her hands. Survive. I nodded vigorously at her with my chapped lips stretched into a grimace. Seeing my response, she immediately threw a sack over me, hoisted me onto her shoulder, and rushed outside. In less time than it takes for an incense stick to burn, Matron Mo set me down again and removed the hood from my head. I knew this place all too well. It was Fiona Sue's bedchamber. Sure enough, Fiona Sue sat upright on the bed, her calves and arms tightly bandaged, her face noticeably paler than usual. I understood the situation, yet I couldn't help but marvel. She truly had a ruthless streak when it came to certain matters. Fiona Sue drew a soft whip from beside the bed and lashed me again and again. Only when she grew tired and fresh blood began seeping through the bandages on her arms and legs did she finally stop and begin her interrogation. All she wanted to know was what exactly the Crown Prince and I had been doing together. She demanded a detailed recounting of everything that had happened that day. As a shadow who could only obey her, I naturally recounted everything in meticulous detail, even describing how I shot and killed a full-grown stag with a single arrow and how the Crown Prince praised my equestrian and archery skills. Fiona Sue sat trembling on the bed, clutching the soft whip she had just used to strike me. I knew she was jealous, consumed by envy. But Fiona Sue, it was you who repeatedly handed opportunities to me. How can you blame me? Of course, I never mentioned that the Crown Prince knew about the scar on my face. After all, why would His Highness remember such a trivial matter? 6. Fiona Sue would never let me die, but neither would she allow me to live too happily. The damp environment was hardly conducive to healing, and even the medicinal concoctions were served cold each day. Fortunately, she removed all the ropes binding me, likely thinking a cripple couldn't possibly cause any trouble. The night was slightly chilly, and I had cracked open the window, just enough to glimpse the bright moonlight. A dark shadow flashed by, then stood silently by the window. I found it somewhat amusing. Is the Sioux residence really so easy for you to come and go as you please? The dark figure pushed open the window, blocking most of the moonlight, even without making out his face. I knew it was the little thief I had met half a year ago. There's nothing worth stealing here. My throat, parched from lack of water, sounded like a broken gong. The shadowy figure still didn't speak, but instead climbed in and placed a bag of honey candy by the bedside. Only then did I see clearly the stubble covering his chin, the red veins filling his eyes, and the faint chill emanating from his body. Just as I was about to speak, he pressed his finger against my wound, the pain nearly making me cry out. But he didn't stop, swiftly removing all the bandages covering my injuries and reapplying them with his own ointment. After finishing, he glanced back at me one last time before climbing out the window and vanishing into the night. I took a piece of honey candy from the bag, placing it in my mouth and carefully savoring as it slowly melted on my tongue, soon filling my entire mouth. How incredibly sweet. Honestly, how could a single piece of candy taste so sweet? Thanks to that little rascal, my bedside would occasionally be graced with Eastgate's peach blossom cakes, the West Market's soft mochi cakes, the Spice Pavilion's braised pork knuckle, and even the latest jewelry and rouge from the Plum Pavilion. Among all these, my absolute favorite was that sandalwood pin. Though it was just a simple pin, it was carved with a tiny plum blossom. Plum blossoms have always been my favorite. 7. A bone injury takes 100 days to heal, but Fiona Sue would never let me rest for that long. Because her wounds had healed, she wanted to attend the capital's poetry gatherings, flower viewing parties, polo matches, arrow tossing competitions. She wanted to see her Crown Prince brother. Since the incident at the hunting grounds, the Sioux clan had become meritorious subjects for saving the emperor, and Fiona Sue was even granted the title Baroness of Liang. The Crown Prince hadn't lied. He truly wasn't badly injured, even having the energy to visit the Sioux residence several times to see Fiona Sioux. When I saw Fiona Sioux again, her face was flushed like peach blossoms, her eyes sparkling with vitality. I have to admit, this face is truly beautiful. No, our face is truly beautiful. Of course, General Finian, to whom she was betrothed, had also come, rushing back from the frontier overnight, right after Fiona Sioux was injured. Unfortunately, Fiona Sioux drove him away outright, and it's said he drowned his sorrows in drink for many days after. Poor young general. He had no idea just how vast Fiona Sioux's ambitions were. When Fiona Sioux appeared at the Shangyan Villa, everyone was struck with awe. The 16-year-old girl was as captivating as a blooming flower. Even the slightest gesture drew everyone's gaze. Before the crown prince had even arrived, Prince Victor approached her first. He handed a brilliantly blooming flower to Fiona Sioux and said in a perfectly measured tone, "What you desire is not the crown prince, but the position of crown princess, and eventually, empress. And only I can make that happen for you." Fiona Sioux stiffened, and it wasn't until Prince Victor had walked away that she tremblingly tucked the clivia lily he had just given her into her hair. I watched her impassively as she walked toward the path she had always dreamed of. Prince Victor's words proved to be a curse. Within 3 days, the crown prince had fallen out of the emperor's favor, and officials jointly petitioned for his removal. Fiona Sioux paced restlessly in her chamber, caught between excitement and doubt. 7 days later, she finally kept her appointment with Prince Victor. Now, the prince named Victor Zhao had become the crown prince. Fiona Sioux returned to her carefree, cheerful self, as if worries had never touched her. For Victor Zhao adored her jade, like body more than her intellect, a preference that brought Fiona immense reassurance. He gained not only Fiona's support, but also that of the entire Sioux clan. Yet, she was too happy. So happy, she forgot the approaching wedding date. 8. Another spring arrived with blooming flowers, but Fiona Sioux felt uneasy. The crabapple branches bent low under their weight, and bees quietly tucked autumn's promise deep within the blossoms. I wasn't the only one aware her monthly courses hadn't arrived. The matron and Victor Zhao both knew, while the naive Sioux clan patriarch still believed his daughter remained an untouched maiden. Fiona Sioux arranged to meet Victor Zhao, recounting everything with tearful fragility. Victor Zhao drew Fiona into his embrace, tenderly stroking her hair as he sighed deeply. "My dear Wanner, I've only recently assumed the crown prince's position. To propose marriage now would ruin both our reputations." Fiona nuzzled against his chest, whispering coyly, "But this is our child. How can you bear to abandon it?" I stood silently nearby, listening to their hollow professions. Victor Zhao helped Fiona to her feet. "Wanner, you must remember, we're playing the long game. I too yearn for our child's arrival, but Finian Ling just pushed the barbarians 30 miles beyond Shershur Garrison. We cannot afford to offend him now." Finian Ling, that was the young general's name. Who could have predicted he'd prove so formidable? Fiona Sioux froze for a moment, then opened her mouth to ask, "Are you saying I still have to marry Finian Ling?" The atmosphere in the room instantly froze as Fiona stared rigidly at Victor Zhao. While Victor Zhao was still sighing, Fiona Sioux suddenly stood up and removed the veil from my face. My eyelashes trembled slightly as I lowered my gaze, fixing it solely on the floor. After a long while, Fiona Sioux sobbed and said, "I know you have grand ambitions, but in this lifetime, I only wish to be with you. This is my personal handmaiden, who bears a striking resemblance to me and has always been the most obedient since our days in the inner chambers." Seeing Victor Zhao still hesitating, Fiona Sioux continued, "If I truly end up with Finian Ling, do you think my father would still offer you that support? Once your great undertaking is accomplished, I will reappear and acknowledge her as my sworn sister. Marrying the sworn sister of the Empress would not be beneath General Ling's station." Convinced by Fiona Sioux, Victor Zhao waved his hand and let her make the decision herself. I obediently knelt down and kowtowed with proper form, my forehead touching the floor audibly. "Thank you, Miss, for bestowing this marriage. Thank you, Fiona Sue, for choosing to walk into the abyss yourself. Fiona Sue snorted coldly. You should be grateful for this face of yours. 9. With less than 2 months until the wedding, time was too tight, so everything had to be kept simple. Though it was said to be simplified, it was actually because I was just a maid, and the matron didn't want to put in much effort. The betrothal gifts sent by Finney and Ling were cut by more than half by the matron, who then tossed in one or too long, neglected estates to serve as my dowry. I picked a piece of honey candy from the pouch by the window, let it slowly dissolve in my mouth, and carefully worked on the wedding dress in my hands. A sense of peace and tranquility, unlike any I had ever known, spread through my heart. July 25th was the day Finney and Ling came to fetch his bride. Apart from a few red lanterns and some red silk draped here and there, the Sioux residence was no different from any other day. To persuade the grand censor of the Sioux clan, Fiona Sue dragged me before him and made quite a scene, crying and carrying on. So, the current bleak state of the Sioux clan was well known to its master. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but let out a cold laugh. I hadn't taken much from the Sioux residence, only wearing an ill-suited wooden hairpin in my hair, the lively firecrackers, the bright red wedding robe, the steady sedan chair, and the laughing crowd all carried me further and further away from that cold Sioux mansion. I clutched the apple tightly in my hand, but tears streamed uncontrollably from my eyes. This place that had trapped me for 17 years. I never wished to return for the rest of my life. Dazed, I completed all the intricate rituals and was escorted into the bridal chamber. I took shallow breaths. Since the hunting grounds incident, my heart had never felt such turbulence. The noise outside continued as dusk fell. Finney and Ling dismissed the rowdy soldiers who wanted to crash the wedding and swayed unsteadily into the room. I tightened my grip on my clothes, but a pair of large hands enveloped mine. The wedding scale slowly lifted, gently raising the red veil covering my head. I saw a young man with a flushed face. His features were sharp and well defined, with rugged brows and eyes that held a tender softness. His thin lips were pressed together as if suppressing emotion, and the bright red wedding robe draped over his tall, sturdy frame even carried a hint of delicate charm. He looked at me too, though seemingly nervous, pulling me to sit at the table before picking up the wedding wine and gesturing for us to link arms and drink. I gave a light laugh, extending my arm to intertwine with his. It felt as though from that moment on, our lives would be deeply intertwined, never to part. I don't remember what happened next, only the lingering taste on my lips, the freshness of Eastgate peach blossom cakes, the fragrant stickiness of the West Market's mochi cakes, the tenderness of the Spice Pavilion's braised pork knuckle, and the sweetness of honey candy melting in my mouth, with red candles warming the bridal chamber. How could such a spring night be wasted? 10. Married life turned out far more joyful than I had imagined. The barbarians at Shershaw Garrison had already surrendered, and Finian Ling was promoted to General Finian, becoming a renowned figure in the military. He finally had leisure time to accompany me in playing polo and pitching arrows. Every time I encountered Victor Zhao, I could see the veiled woman standing beside him. I clearly sensed her gaze, but never paid it any mind. What concerned me was how many points we scored in polo, how many arrows landed in the pot. What concerned me was whether I was content and at ease, whether my husband was genuinely happy. Finally, Victor Zhao extended an invitation to Finian Ling. Unwilling to leave me alone at the estate, he insisted on bringing me along. I deliberately had myself adorned more lavishly than ever before. The dishes at the Spice Pavilion were the finest in the capital, and today I ate with exceptional satisfaction. I would have enjoyed the meal even more if Fiona Sue's face across the table had been gloomier. Fiona Sue sent both Victor Zhao and Finian Ling away before removing her veil and glaring at me fiercely. Maeve Sue, I advise you to rein it in. You're currently living under my identity. I stuffed the braised pork knuckle into my mouth before glancing at Fiona Sue. I had almost forgotten my original name was Maeve Sue until she mentioned it. I wiped the corner of my mouth and finally looked her squarely in the eye. We rarely faced each other like this. without any barriers between us. In the past, she was unwilling. Now, she is unable. Fiona Sue looked haggard and dispirited, as if she hadn't been faring well lately. Seeing her in such a state filled me with immense satisfaction. My husband and I are deeply in love. What is there to hide? You shameless wench. A disgraceful, low-born thing. Fiona Sue fumed, spewing all sorts of vile insults. I simply watched calmly as she descended into madness, feeling an infinite sense of delight within. Right now, she only feels displeased and aggrieved, but I intend for her to taste every bit of suffering I once endured. The private room's door swung open, and Fiona Sue hurriedly covered her face with the veil. I looked at her and smiled faintly. Now, it is she who must live behind a veil. Finian Ling came over, took my hand, and prepared to leave, but Victor Zhao stopped us. General Ling, a wise man knows when to yield. Finian Ling pushed him away. Sorry, though, I may be blind. My heart sees clearly. Prince Jasper is like a brother to me. I cannot bring myself to slay a brother. After saying this, he turned and left quite gallantly. Oh, and didn't forget to grab the honey candy we bought at the market for me. On the way home, he squeezed my hand and whispered, "Is Winter afraid?" Winter was the name Mother gave me, yet no one had ever cared before. I shook my head, smiling with ease. With my husband by my side, Winter has never been afraid. Hearing this, he seemed quite pleased, humming a tune as we walked home. As expected, on the third day, my husband and I were summoned to the palace. Victor Zhao intended to charge Finian Ling with the murder of former Crown Prince Jasper at the hunting grounds, and I, as his wife, was to accompany him. I laughed so hard in the carriage, I could barely sit straight. Fiona Sue probably had no idea. She thought she had crafted a perfect trap with all her cunning. In truth, she was merely a pawn in the game herself. 11. In the grand hall, Finian Ling disarmed himself and, holding my hand, led me slowly toward the center. Victor Zhao, clad in a python, embroidered robe, glared venomously at Finian Ling, while a veiled woman stood beside him. Finian Ling offered a radiant smile and bowed. My apologies for keeping the crown prince waiting. I followed with a slight curtsy. Finian Ling, what was your intent in attempting to assassinate the former crown prince at the hunting grounds? Victor Zhao's voice echoed through the hall, clear to all present. Finian Ling met his gaze and replied calmly, I was stationed at Shishua Garrison at the time. How could I have mustered the effort to plot such an act? And what motive would I have to harm the former crown prince? Victor Zhao turned his eyes to me, his tone taunting. Naturally, because you feared he would steal the woman you love. No sooner had he spoken than a derisive laugh sounded at the hall's entrance, and Prince Jasper, the former crown prince, strode in unabashed. Victor Zhao froze in disbelief. Jasper should have been under house arrest at this hour. Prince Jasper stepped forward, offering a steady bow to the emperor before rising to stand firmly at mine and Finian Ling's side. The arrows used by the assassin that day were indeed ordinary, but the assailant hadn't anticipated the eldest miss of the Sioux clan joining me on the hunt, so in desperation, resorted to arrows from Victor Zhao's personal troops. Victor Zhao stiffened briefly before relaxing again. I glanced around calmly, my expression neutral, betraying no emotion. Prince Jasper paused before continuing. The arrows from these troops are particularly unique. Not just simple arrowheads, but fitted with two curved hooks. Anyone struck would tear flesh upon removal, leaving a distinctive wound that struggles to heal. Finian Ling knelt before the emperor. My wife's 2 wounds indeed bear these exact characteristics. I glanced at the veiled woman, then bowed unhurriedly. This commoner is willing to be examined by a court physician. After a long silence, a measured voice came from above. Granted, the situation unfolded more smoothly than I'd expected. The physician's examination confirmed the wounds to the emperor, and such arrows were exclusively issued to Victor Zhao's troops. And this was far from the only evidence. Prince Jasper laid out everything: the silver used to bribe officials, the disaster relief funds embezzled, and evidence of collusion with officials for treasonous purposes. Victor Zhao, with his wolfish ambition, had even scheduled an assassination attempt on the emperor. This was all a trap set by Prince Jasper and the emperor, a scheme to purge the court, eradicate the corrupt, and eliminate threats root and stem. The Grand Censor of the Sioux clan was naturally implicated. I feigned a few pleas for mercy and managed to spare his life. But the emperor waved his hand and assigned him to serve as a prefect at the border. Departing next month, my eyesight has always been sharp. With just a glance, I noticed Fiona Sue's trembling form as she struggled to contain her emotions. I stood calmly beside Finian Ling, my expression composed. I wonder how Fiona Sue, now carrying the child of a disgraced official, must be feeling. Perhaps I'm narrow-minded, but seeing her unhappy brings me immense joy. I also know she won't let this rest easily. 12. After resting at home for a few days, I heard that Prince Jasper had been reinstated as Crown Prince. As Finian Ling applied my eyebrow makeup, he remarked, "It's only right, among the princes. Victor Zhao isn't the only ambitious one, but this time Prince Jasper has rooted out too many incompetent officials who prey on the people's livelihood. Not making him crown prince would be inappropriate." I glanced sideways at him, his features vibrant, brimming with energy, truly the image of a spirited young man. "You understand court politics? You underestimate your husband too much." He gave a light hum, reaching out to stroke my cheek, his fingers lingering over the scar on its side. "Does it still hurt?" I shook my head. After all this time, the scar had faded to a faint line. How could it still hurt? He paused, then pulled a handkerchief from his robe, carefully verifying if it was my handiwork. It was indeed the handkerchief I had embroidered for Fiona Sue years ago. The stitches still somewhat clumsy, and aside from that, there were faint bloodstains. Clearly something he had carried with him into battle. Seeing me lost in thought, Finian Ling happily tucked the handkerchief back into his clothes, muttering that Prince Jasper hadn't lied to him. I smiled brightly in return. Some things need not be spoken aloud. Half a month later, the Empress invited me to the palace for a visit, saying she had matters to discuss. I counted on my fingers. The day for the Sioux clan to leave the city was nearing. Fiona Sue was growing impatient. Finian Ling carefully helped me into the carriage, his face full of worry. I smiled at him and began listing treats I wanted: dragon beard candy, snowskin mooncakes, jujube cakes, and the new roast suckling pig from the Spice Pavilion. I wanted them all. Only then did he break into a smile, urging me to be sure to return home in time for dinner. I patted his hand, signaling he needn't worry too much. Compared to Finian Ling, I was calmer, even feeling a hint of excitement. He might not know how a noble lady of the capital ought to behave, but I do. Not only do I understand the ways of Kyoto's noble ladies, but I also know exactly what the royal family expects of a general's wife, and of the eldest miss of the Sioux clan. The palace's blooming garden was now alive with a riot of flowers. Seated beside the Empress was Fiona Sue, making no attempt to conceal herself. I first stepped forward and performed a proper bow, then settled steadily into my seat. I ensured every movement was both proper and natural. Even the strictest etiquette instructor could find no fault. The Empress glanced at me, then at Fiona Sue seated beside her, her eyes shifting with scrutiny before resting her hand on the bouquet before her. Roses and peonies do resemble each other. Sometimes even I struggle to tell them apart. Fiona Sue clearly didn't understand what the Empress meant. "Your Majesty, the flowers can be admired another day, but this wench took my place at the wedding and locked me away. My parents can testify to this. She has committed treason by deceiving the throne and must not be let off." I covered my slightly upturned lips with my handkerchief. The difference between roses and peonies is clear to those with discerning eyes. Most importantly, neither roses nor peonies should delude themselves into believing they can become peonies. The Empress looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, then quickly concealed it. "Do you have anything to say in response to this young lady's accusations?" The Empress looked at me, as if testing my reaction. I remained calm and unhurried, speaking softly, "Just because she bears a face resembling mine, she thinks she is the general's wife. Such an ignorant servant, daring to soil your ears with such words. Fiona, Sue was indignant, slapping her jade hand on the table and summoning servants to bring Matron Mo forward. The Empress gently questioned Matron Mo, asking her to identify the true eldest miss of the Sue clan between me and Fiona Sue. Matron Mo knelt on the ground and pointed her finger at me. Before I could speak, Fiona Sue urgently said, "Do not forget the one at the Western Manor." I lifted my gaze, staring directly at Fiona Sue. She always assumed I merely resembled her by chance, unaware that my mother was the first wife of the Sue clan's master. The matron, her own sister, dealt a fatal blow on the day I was born, falsely accusing my mother of adultery and claiming the child in her womb was a bastard. Fortunately, I was destined to survive. Matron Mo, originally my mother's handmaiden, swapped me with a stillborn baby from a farm wife on the estate right after my birth, thus saving my life. The day the matron found me in the servants' quarters, she had Matron Mo's tongue torn out brutally, but Matron Mo had no children or grandchildren. The only one she ever cared about was my mother. Matron Mo frowned, about to speak again, when another entered the Wanjing courtyard. It was none other than Crown Prince Jasper. "What's this about the Western Estate? Discussing something interesting?" Seeing the Crown Prince arrive, the Empress recounted the earlier events to him. He burst into laughter upon hearing it. "What's so difficult about that? That lad Finian Ling once told me he secretly met the young lady of the Sue clan right after their engagement, bringing honey candy and a plum blossom branch, but accidentally ended up scarring her face." As soon as Prince Jasper finished speaking, Fiona Sue's expression shifted repeatedly, as if suddenly remembering something. She pointed at me and said, "Impossible. I was the one who slashed that scar on her face." "So, you two were already carrying on back then." "That's not how you should put it." Prince Jasper chuckled. "It was mutual affection. Why do you think Finian Ling fought so fiercely on the battlefield? To earn merits so he could marry his beloved, of course." The Empress sat between them, glancing left and right, her thoughts unreadable. Prince Jasper took a sip of tea. "Besides, the young lady of a Sue clan saved my life. When she escorted me back to camp that day, I clearly saw the scar on her left cheek." The Empress looked toward me. I gently wiped the powder from my cheek with a handkerchief, revealing the faint scar. The conclusion was self-evident. Only then did Fiona Sue realize what she was facing. She immediately knelt, kowtowing to the Empress, then to the Crown Prince, and finally to me. Neither the Empress nor the Crown Prince showed any reaction. Desperate, she crawled to my feet. "I'll never hit you again, never scold you. Let's swap back our identities. Please? I'll give you anything you want." I smiled faintly, lifting her chin with my fingertip. "What lowly wench dares beg for death so eagerly? Drag her away. 50 strikes with the staff." Fiona Sue's eyes widened instantly, as if unable to believe these words came from me. I leaned close to her ear and whispered, "I wonder, is Prince Victor's bastard still in your womb?" Her screams gradually faded amid the repeated strikes of the cane. The Empress dismissed us, claiming a headache had come upon her. I rose and straightened my garments, my expression gentle, nearly unchanged from when I had arrived. I knew clearly that whether it was the Empress, the Crown Prince, or any member of the royal family, what they wanted was not the eldest miss of the Sue clan, but a poised, courteous, and ever loyal general's wife. It would be even better if this general's wife had some leverage in their hands. As for truth or falsehood, does it truly matter? Unfortunately, Fiona Sue never understood this principle. She believed the blood flowing in her veins could save her life. 13. By the time I returned home, night had fallen, and the residence was brightly lit. Finian Ling was waiting at the entrance, and as soon as my carriage arrived, he hurried forward to greet me. He carefully helped me down, whispering by my ear, "The person sent by the Crown Prince has been settled in the West Wing. I've just dispatched a physician to attend to them." I froze for a moment, then instantly realized exactly who it must be. Steadying my steps, I hurried toward the West Wing as soon as I entered the residence. There, I saw that frail, gaunt figure. It was my mother. She was propping herself up on her elbows, gazing at me. I threw myself into her arms, tears streaming uncontrollably. How wonderful. Not only had I escaped my cage, but I could see my mother again. Finian Ling stood awkwardly nearby, before finally bringing over a dining table, at the center of which sat a glistening golden, roasted suckling pig. I laughed through my tears. All those past hardships had not been in vain. The next 6 months were the most carefree time I had ever known. I could do everything I had ever dreamed of doing, making friends, admiring flowers, savoring tea. These once distant pleasures became tangible realities, one by one, right in my hands. Unfortunately, heaven had other plans. The barbarians who had already surrendered suddenly turned hostile, raiding several cities and plundering all their granaries. Finian Ling received the imperial order at the palace in the morning and was hastily leading troops to the frontier the very next day. I urgently sought an audience with the empress at the palace and was granted permission to accompany the army. Finian Ling was uncharacteristically furious, ignoring me for several days and scarcely seeing me during the march. But I wasn't worried. My sole reason for insisting on going to the front lines was that the first place the barbarians attacked was precisely the county where the Sioux clan's master had taken office half a year prior. It wasn't concern for their safety that drove me. I simply doubted the Sioux clan would obediently accept the emperor's arrangements. Upon reaching Shirshua garrison, I realized my suspicions were not unfounded. The place where the Sioux clan's master had been assigned was called Yonglong County, the closest county to Shirshua garrison, now ravaged by the barbarians. It lay in ruins with its people displaced, yet there was no trace of the Sioux clan. After receiving 50 lashes at the palace last time, the Sioux clan still sent someone to bring Fiona, Sioux, back home. Within 7 days, they departed for Yonglong County. I changed into riding attire and went to Finian Ling's tent to find him. Finian Ling's beard had grown much longer, and exhaustion showed in his eyes. Yet, he stubbornly continued studying the topographic map on the sand table. I shared my findings with him. Finian Ling's brow relaxed briefly before his gaze turned sharp and ruthless. I had never understood how the barbarians managed to bypass the most heavily guarded areas and strike directly at the granaries. But if someone had deliberately leaked the city defense plans, everything made sense. I voiced my concerns about the city defense maps. Finian Ling immediately summoned his subordinates, wrote a letter to be dispatched, and then gathered all the generals for a strategy meeting. The other generals hesitated when they saw me standing beside Finian Ling, but he ignored them entirely and focused intently on laying out the plan. In the following days, I worked to reassure the civilians within the city, while Finian Ling organized the perimeter defenses. The barbarians had nearly 100,000 troops, while we only had 30,000. The disparity in numbers was truly overwhelming. Moreover, according to estimates, the barbarians with the defense map would return within days to crush this place and formally declare war. Finian Ling was not one to wait passively. He allocated 30% of our forces to flank the enemy for a surprise attack. As he departed under the cover of deep night, I kissed his eyelids and whispered only, "No regrets." He held me gently for a moment, then released me, swung onto his horse, and rode away. Watching his figure vanish into the darkness, I drew 2 deep breaths before turning back toward the city. Having come this far, I was already content with all I had gained. Whatever remained now was pure profit. 2 days later, at the first light of dawn, a woman on horseback knocked at the city gates. She shouted, claiming to be the wife of General Finian, demanding the guards open the gates. Before I even reached the wall, I heard her cry, "Open quickly. I am General Finian's wife. The general is trapped. Send reinforcements at once." Stunned, I hurried to the top of the wall and looked down at the figure below. I was now dressed in riding attire, wearing a set of armor left behind by Finian Ling. Looking down from afar, I saw Fiona Sioux clad in white robes, stained with faint traces of blood, desperately pounding on the city gate. The city defense general standing beside me stepped forward and asked, What proof do you have that you are the general's wife? Fiona Sue immediately raised a sword from her side. This is General Finian's personal sword. You must recognize it. General Finian is currently trapped in the mountains, 5 li from here. Open the gates quickly and send help. I frowned slightly at the sight of the sword. It was indeed Finian Ling's sword. But if Fiona Sue had come here, it proved that the location she mentioned was certainly an ambush. I stepped forward and declared clearly, "You claim to be General Finian's wife? Then tell me, who do you think I am?" When Fiona Sue looked up at me, she seemed momentarily dazed, but quickly replied with conviction, "You wretched wench. How dare you pretend to be the general's wife? You were left in the city to bolster morale, not to impersonate me." I sneered coldly. "Long time no see. I never expected you to actually become wiser. General Finian and I are exceptionally devoted to each other. Naturally, I must be with him at all times. Now that he is trapped, do not waste another moment." The guard commander glanced at me, seeming somewhat hesitant, standing atop the high wall. I looked down at her without uttering a single word. Fiona Sue continued to wail. "To ensure my escape, he entrusted me with his most cherished token. Yet you blind fools are sending him to his death for nothing." As she spoke, she drew a handkerchief from her robes. The very handkerchief I had embroidered with winter plum blossoms myself. The guard commander, having fought many battles alongside Finian Ling, recognized it instantly as the handkerchief Finian had always treasured. Even standing beside me, he tightened his grip on his sword. I curled my lips into a faint smile, took a soldier's bow, and with one shot pierced her right arm. She cried out in pain, staring at me in disbelief. This archery skill was taught to me by my husband. How is it? Quite accurate, isn't it? Does it hurt more than the wound you inflicted on yourself? Before Fiona Sue could react, I drew the commander's seal from my sleeve. The commander's seal is here. All heed my command. Finian Ling entrusted this to me before he left, with only one demand: await reinforcements and guard the city gates. At the sight of the general's token, everyone around knelt down, even the city guard commander half, kneeling at my side. Hold the city gates at all costs. Not an inch of retreat. Hearing the commotion, Fiona Sue below the wall immediately turned her horse to flee. From afar, I drew my bow to its fullest and shot an arrow toward her calf. She nearly fell from her horse but gritted her teeth and continued riding away. After Fiona Sue departed, the atmosphere within the city grew solemn. Regardless of how much truth was in her words, the fact remained that Finian Ling was now missing without news. As afternoon neared, the setting sun blazed fiercely at the horizon. A vast, dark horde of barbarian troops advanced from the distance, looking like an endless storm cloud poised to unleash a tempest. I had already organized the evacuation of civilians from the city several days prior. Now, aside from the soldiers and officials, only some wealthy landowners and civilians determined to defend the city remained. Everyone's nerves had been strained all day, and now their focus was exceptionally intense. The barbarian army halted at a position roughly 3 li from the city gates. A prisoner's cart was slowly pushed forward from the rear. I tightened my grip on the bow, staring fixedly at the person inside the cart. The barbarian general dragged the person out of the cart, accompanied by jeers from those around. That person was Fiona Sue. The barbarian general stood beneath the city gates, laughing mockingly as he tore Fiona Sue's clothes to shreds, repeatedly calling her General Finian's wife. It seemed Fiona Sue had been deceiving both sides. Amused by the absurdity, I ascended the city wall, drew my bow, and fired 3 consecutive arrows at the barbarian general. He blocked the shots aimed at his head and chest, but the last arrow struck squarely into his calf. I took off my helmet and laughed loudly. If she is General Finian's wife, then who am I, you blind fools, tricked by an impostor without even knowing it? This is utterly ridiculous. The barbarian general realized he had been deceived the moment he saw me, and he tied Fiona Sue to the back of his horse, dragging her until she was torn to shreds. I stood coldly watching from the city wall. Not a single soul here would mourn for her. For those who betray their country and collude with the enemy, no punishment is too severe, not even death by 1,000 cuts. The next 2 days were difficult for us. Although we had shamed them with our taunts before the battle, the gap in strength between the two sides was too vast. By the third day, we were on the brink of running out of supplies and ammunition. The city walls were stained with blood, and both inside and outside the city lay in ruins. Leaning against the cold wall, I gazed up at the stars in the sky. Dying wrapped in a horse's hide was never the ending I had envisioned. But over these past 2 weeks, I had witnessed far too much. For a general to die for the people is not a disgrace. It is an honor. Late that night, the city's general sent word that Prince Jasper was rushing from the capital with 100,000 troops, now only 10 miles away, and set to arrive by tomorrow morning. Yet there was no news of Finian Ling. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. I didn't know why my parched eyes couldn't shed a single tear. I only knew he had asked me to hold the city before he left. Now, the city was held. Finian Ling, where are you? Prince Jasper looked at me, raised his hand, but in the end only patted my shoulder. I knelt down and raised the commander's seal high. Prince Jasper let out a long sigh before taking from my hands the seal that belonged to Finian Ling. The next day's battle was heartening. The barbarians hadn't expected our reinforcements to arrive so swiftly, and 200,000 men dyed the land outside the walls crimson. On the third day, the barbarians suffered a crushing defeat. As Prince Jasper pressed the main assault from the front, a unit suddenly charged from the enemy's left flank, like a sharp sword thrust straight into the enemy's belly. The enemy formation broke into chaos, leading to a great rout as they scattered and fled. The moment I saw Finian Ling, my vision blurred with tears. I had thought that after so long, I had forgotten how to cry. Yet in that instant, my heart was flooded with overwhelming emotion. Finian Ling had led 9,000 troops to flank the enemy's rear, but their scouts were spotted, forcing them to feign defeat and flee in disarray, abandoning their armor. This was how Fiona Sue came to possess Finian Ling's sword. Unexpectedly, after penetrating deep behind enemy lines, they lost their way and stumbled upon the barbarian chieftain's main tent. Finian Ling immediately ordered a raid on the tent to capture the enemy commander, seizing the opportunity to also apprehend the traitorous couple from the Sioux clan who had colluded with the foe. Crown Prince Jasper beheaded the barbarian chieftain on the spot and sent the Sioux clan couple to the capital for judgment. Thus, the war finally drew to a close. 15. Upon returning to the capital, the emperor bestowed upon me the title Duchess of Liang and granted me the privilege to accompany my husband on military campaigns. I knelt formally in the palace hall, and the emperor asked if I desired any further rewards. I bowed deeply in reverence. The Sioux clan committed treason and betrayed the nation, earning universal scorn and abandonment. I too am ashamed to bear the Sioux surname, and beg your majesty for compassion. Grant me a new name. The hall fell silent for a long while before the emperor finally uttered a single word: granted. From that day onward, Fiona Sue and Maeve Sue ceased to exist in this world, leaving only Princess Winter of Liang. Prince Jasper clamored to host a renewed wedding ceremony for Finian Ling and me, insisting it was his duty as an elder brother. The empress added that a royal princess must not be wed in a manner beneath her station. 3 months later, Finian Ling and I held our second wedding. We stood together on the platform outside the grand hall as the morning sun slowly rose, its warm rays enveloping my face. Winter fears no cold. The lady's beauty at last shines through. Extra, Finian Ling. When I returned from Shirsha Garrison, the emperor appointed me General Finian and arranged my marriage to Fiona Sue, the eldest daughter of the Grand Censor. Prince Jasper laughed so hard upon hearing the news that he could barely hold his wine cup steady. He remarked, "That eldest daughter is quite ambitious. She's been using every trick in the book to catch my attention since she was 13. He also mentioned that this legitimate daughter had a formidable maid by her side, always able to help Fiona Sue escape danger. I wasn't particularly concerned. My parents had died in battle when I was 7. The emperor, pitying me, brought me into the palace to grow up alongside Prince Jasper. Still, having a wife would be a good thing after all. Before heading to Shershaw Garrison again, I scaled the wall of the Grand Censor's estate, intending to meet my future wife. One shouldn't visit empty-handed, so I bought some honey candy that girls love and tucked it into my robe. Avoiding the guards in the courtyard, I easily found the legitimate daughter's residence. To be honest, my behavior was rather like that of a rogue. As soon as I climbed onto the wall, I saw a strikingly beautiful woman kneeling in the snow. Her face was exquisite, but a cut marred her cheek, the crimson blood stark against the white winter snow. She seemed startled at the sight of me, her eyes wide with surprise. I signaled for her to stay quiet and tossed a piece of honey candy toward her. A sudden cry came from inside the house, and the woman lowered her head, murmuring, "I am Fiona Sue's most wretched wench." Hearing this, I froze for a moment before suddenly realizing what had happened. Furious, I drew my sword and leaped down from the courtyard wall. The woman timidly shook her head, and I halted at the doorstep. Entering now would do her no good. It might even backfire. I gave the honey candy from my bosom to the woman kneeling in the snow. Prince Jasper was right. Even the daughter of the Grand Censor isn't necessarily virtuous. While I was at the frontier, a major incident occurred in the capital. Prince Jasper was ambushed at the hunting grounds, and it was the Sioux clan's eldest daughter who saved him. When I heard this, I clicked my tongue in amazement. This eldest daughter was quite cunning, but a letter from Prince Jasper made me rush back without delay. He said the woman who saved him had a scar on her face. Countless thoughts raced through my mind, only to be extinguished the moment I saw Fiona Sue. It wasn't her, her demeanor, her mannerisms, her figure. None of it was her, except for that face. But Fiona Sue's face was flawlessly fair and tender, without a single scar. I grew dazed, my thoughts in turmoil. I spent my days clutching a wine jar, drinking myself into oblivion. Had everything I'd seen before been just a dream? Prince Jasper came to me with a wine jar in hand, saying he clearly remembered the woman who saved him had a scar on her face. Clearly, it wasn't Fiona Sue who had rescued him. That very night, I searched every corner of the Sioux residence and finally found her in a woodshed. She was weak, the wounds on her arms and legs poorly treated. My heart ached at the sight, but I didn't know what to say, so I simply tended to her injuries. When I saw the wounds, I couldn't help but scoff. Victor Zhao probably never imagined the arrow wounds from his private troops were so easily recognizable. I told Prince Jasper about this. He immediately began an investigation and soon uncovered Victor Zhao's treacherous ambitions. To play this chess game well, we had to keep many things unspoken. That woman was named Maeve Sue, a name not particularly elegant, but one that suited her well. I secretly gifted her many things, including a plum blossom hairpin. I hoped she would understand my feelings. When Prince Jasper sent me off to Shershaw Garrison, he pulled a handkerchief from his robe. Embroidered on it was a single plum blossom branch. Prince Jasper said this handkerchief was likely her handiwork. Though hesitant, I took it from his hand. To ensure her safety, I needed more military achievements. In the end, clutching that handkerchief, I survived countless life and death battles. By the time I returned from Shershaw Garrison, Prince Jasper's chess game was mostly played. He told me the one I would most likely marry was that woman named Maeve Sue. I was so overjoyed I couldn't sleep for days. But Prince Jasper remained stern-faced. I knew this game had grown dangerously large. Yet I didn't care. If anything went wrong, I would trade all my military honors to protect her. I refused to believe that saving a mere maid is impossible. She was even more clever than I imagined, evading everyone's scrutiny again and again without asking a single question. That day at the Brocade Gardens, she portrayed General Finian's wife with such calm and precision. I knew, from that day on, she belonged only to me, whether she was called Fiona Sue or Maeve Sue. When I left for Shershaw Garrison, she stubbornly insisted on following. Even when I grew angry, she did not yield an inch. But when she revealed the crisis with the city defense plans, I saw this woman in a new light once more. Her heart held far more than the confines of a household's walls. I wrote to Prince Jasper, pleading for him to persuade the emperor to send reinforcements. At the end, I included a letter of divorce. I told Prince Jasper that if I were to die, he must look after her. I thought I would never see her again, yet there she stood atop the city wall, drawing her about taut, fierce as a seasoned general on the battlefield. I smiled. Of course, she's also called Winter. How could she wither from winter's frost? She would forever bloom upon the highest branch. My Princess Winter. Side story, Prince Jasper, the Sioux clan's daughter, puts on a dreadfully poor performance. How could someone so coarse ever embroider such exquisite plum blossoms? Yet I accepted it nonetheless, because I noticed the maid standing beside her. Her eyes bore an uncanny resemblance to Fiona Sue's. I caught the scent of a hidden scheme, but Father Emperor discovered my investigation midway. He glanced through my findings before tossing them back to me. The next day, Father Emperor decreed Finian Ling's marriage to the Sioux clan's daughter. Mother Empress told me the royal family needs no daughter of the Grand Censor as Empress. When one holds too much power, they spiral beyond control. Finian Ling departed for Shershua Garrison, while that Sioux clan daughter brazenly appeared everywhere. Yet every time, I could tell at a glance whether it was truly her or that maid called Maeve Sue. At the hunting grounds, I watched Fiona Sue transform before my eyes, and out of curiosity, I invited her to join the hunt. Her riding and archery were truly impressive, her etiquette flawless, just like a true daughter of the Sioux clan. But who could have expected someone would try to harm me so viciously in the hunting grounds? I had my golden silk armor, but she did not. Though injured far worse than I, she stubbornly refused to show weakness. I leaned gently against her back, gazing at her profile, where a scar marked her left cheek. I couldn't help but find it ironic. Even a maid in the Sioux clan was treated so harshly. I shared this with Finian Ling, who was stationed at Shershua Garrison. Little did I know, he would rush back day and night without rest. I thought he had come to see me, but he turned straight toward the Sioux residence. TSK, ditching a friend for a pretty face. He was turned away by Fiona Sue and brooded in disappointment for a long time. I brought a jug of wine to find him, hoping to offer some comfort. Truth be told, after my wounds healed, I visited the Sioux residence a few times myself. Watching Fiona Sue put on her act was always a source of amusement. Finian Ling seemed to have uncovered something extraordinary, rushing to the Sioux residence again that very night. The next day, he told me that the arrow wound on Fiona Sue's maid could only have been inflicted by Victor Zhao's personal troops. I raised an eyebrow, surprised that he had also noticed Maeve Sue. Everything that followed fell into place naturally. I presented my findings to the Father Emperor. The Father Emperor stared at the contents for a long time before slowly asking me, "Do you care for that woman so deeply?" I did not know how to respond, because I wasn't sure if it could be called affection. The Father Emperor subtly hinted to Victor Zhao that securing the support of the Grand Censor would make him the Crown Prince. That fool Victor Zhao truly was the perfect match for Fiona Sue. Yet I never imagined the two would actually become entangled. The Empress Mother told me that ambition is a good thing, but ambition without foresight only leads to one's own ruin. Indeed, as the wedding approached, Fiona Sue was found to be with child. There was only one person who could take her place in the marriage. I couldn't quite describe this feeling, only that my heart felt heavily burdened. This scheme I laid was vast in scale, with but one goal: to thoroughly eradicate those with disloyal intentions. Ling Finian and his wife worked together seamlessly. That woman named Fiona Sue would likely never see the light of day again. Some days later, I encountered Fiona Sue once more within the Wanjin garden. I had sent men to rescue the women from the Wester Manor, who then entered Wanjin garden to help extricate her from trouble. I did not lie. Not a single word was false. Yet still, the Empress Dowager punished me, making me kneel in Wanjin garden for nearly half an hour. A ruler must never reveal their personal preferences. She followed Finian Ling to Shershua Garrison. I couldn't understand what a delicate woman like her was going to do at Shershua Garrison. Not long after, I received a letter from Finian Ling. Aside from detailing the situation at Shersha. It contained a letter of divorce. He said that if he were to die, he wished for me to look after her. The letter had been opened by someone, yet I still knelt in the grand hall. Father Emperor asked me, for what reason? I said, for the people of Shershua garrison and the 30,000 soldiers. I knelt in the grand hall all night. The next day, Father Emperor assigned me 100,000 troops, and I departed for Shershua garrison without delay. At Shershua, I witnessed a scene akin to hell, yet she remained composed, with a resolve in her eyes I had never seen before. The moment I saw her, I wanted to reach out and stroke her hair, but in the end, I only patted her shoulder. As a ruler, I nearly lost my composure again. After returning triumphant to the court, I never learned what Father Emperor said to her. She was placed under the nominal care of the noble consort mother and became Princess Winter of Liang. This, perhaps, is for the best. Even with a changed identity, I can openly protect her.